Wardell Stephen Curry, number 30. One of the best shooters to ever touch a basketball. No, not that one. That's better. While most everyone knows that Steph Curry's dad Dell played in the NBA, how good of a player he was seems to be a little overlooked. Whether it was off the dribble, off a cut, or from a standstill, there was no wasted motion when Dell Curry rose into his picture-perfect jump shot with the lightning-quick release. Yet with some ball handling skills and good passing vision, he was much more than just a shooter, and was a perennial 6th Man of the Year candidate for a reason. A career 40% deep ball shooter, Dell Curry was one of the most productive, efficient, and composed players of his era. An era which saw the Charlotte Hornets join the NBA and saw Dell Curry establish himself as a franchise legend over a decade with the team. And while everyone nowadays knows that Steph Curry got his shooting touch from his dad, what seems to be less acknowledged is that Dell Curry was much more than just a guy who could hit an open three. Let's jog your memory. Born in Harrisburg, Virginia, Dell Curry quickly established himself as one of the state's best players during a stellar high school career at Fort Defiance. As a sophomore, he would help lead them to an undefeated record and a single-A state title, with Curry setting a Group A record by going 11 for 11 in the championship game. During his junior year, Curry continued to impress by reaching 1,000 career points. And even after moving up to Group AA, Fort Defiance kept winning throughout the regular season, but they would fall during the playoffs. Yet Curry showed that he wasn't just a scorer, as he ended the season by being named the County Defensive Player of the Year. Oh yeah, and he wasn't bad on the baseball diamond either. But come his senior year, it was very clear Dell Curry had a future on the hardwood, as the number 1 recruit in the state. And early in the season, he made his college decision, and he wouldn't be going far, staying in-state to attend Virginia Tech, as he felt it gave him the best opportunity for early playing time. But he finished out his senior year strong, becoming Fort Defiance's all-time leading scorer, as well as leading the district in scoring at over 25 points per game, as Fort Defiance would capture the district title, before losing in the state playoffs. But now the McDonald's All-American was heading to Virginia Tech. And Dell Curry would definitely get his playing time early and often, as a day 1 starter on a Hokies team coached by Charles Moyer, as the Hokies would roll out an all-underclassmen starting lineup, led by sophomore Perry Young. But Curry came in and displayed his great shooting touch and solid passing vision as the team's second leading scorer and distributor, and he was getting some pretty high praise from some of the biggest voices in amateur basketball, like Dick Vitale and Howard Garfinkel. And with one of the nation's best offenses, the Hokies would start the year 14-1, which included a huge upset win over top-ranked Memphis State, as they would ultimately finish with a 21-9 regular season record. But after a loss to Tulane in the conference tourney, they would only manage an NIT invite and lose to South Carolina in round 2. Curry came back even better in '84, leading the Hokies in scoring on over 52% shooting, while displaying his active hands and instinct by leading the Metro Conference in steals, en route to being named first team All-Conference. Virginia Tech would have a similar season to last year, which included another big win over Memphis late in the year to avenge an earlier season loss, as the Hokies would finish with a 16-11 record. Then although they would make it all the way to the conference championship game, they would fall to Memphis after a dominant performance from Keith Lee, as they would get another NIT invite. And while they would make it much further than last year, they would fall to Michigan in the semis. Curry and Young continued with their 1-2 punch in '85, as Virginia Tech rolled out their best offense during Curry's time there, with Curry again putting up big steal numbers en route to being named first team All-Conference. However, it didn't translate to much more winning for the Hokies, as while they would have a better regular season than last year, they were still unable to crack the 20-win mark, finishing at 19-7. And while they would fall to Florida State in the conference tourney quarterfinals, they received an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. And while Curry led the Hokies in scoring, he only scored 13 points, as injuries and suspension led to Virginia Tech falling to Temple in round 1. Virginia Tech looked like they would take a step back in '86, as they had lost Perry Young to graduation, but the senior trio of Curry, Bobby Beecher, and Keith Colbert would still do a pretty good job. And without Young, Curry really broke out, putting up the best numbers of his career by far, as he led the conference in scoring on nearly 53% shooting, while his 2.6 steals per game also led the conference. And the Hokies would get off to an impressive 13-2 start, and their rivalry with Memphis State would continue as the second-ranked Tigers would defeat them in Memphis before the Hokies got their revenge a couple weeks later back in Virginia, as they would ultimately finish the regular season at 21-7, with Curry setting the school's all-time scoring record and being named a finalist for the Wooden Award, even though his team received little national attention. Yet the Hokies would suffer a heartbreaking loss to Florida State in the conference tourney quarterfinals. And while they would get a bid to the Big Dance, they again fell in round 1, this time to Villanova, as Curry struggled and scored just 12 points. But he ended his senior season as the Metro Conference Player of the Year and a second-team All-American, so his stock was at an all-time high heading into the 1986 NBA Draft.
The Utah Jazz select Dell Curry of Virginia Tech.
So Dell Curry was a first-round pick, and now joining the Utah Jazz. But it took a little bit, after a brief contract holdout that didn't really seem to be Curry's idea. But he would sign shortly before the season. Yet Jazz head coach Frank Layden had said earlier that every day you're not on the floor hurts you when you're a rookie, and minutes would be hard to come by for Curry throughout his rookie year. Yet he took it all in stride, as the Jazz had a deep backcourt with guys like John Stockton, Daryl Griffith, and Kelly Tripucka. And although Curry appeared in 67 games, he received the least minutes of anyone on the team. And while he would show flashes of his potential, he never got a true opportunity on a Jazz team who finished at 44-38 and got a first-round matchup with Golden State. But Curry would only get a few minutes of action in a 5-game loss, as Curry's rookie year wrapped up with him averaging about 5 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist per game. But with no contract issues to worry about over the offseason, Curry was optimistic heading into next year. But his next season wouldn't be in Utah, as shortly before the following season began, he was included in a trade to Cleveland, where he would join an up-and-coming Cavs team who already had their backcourt set with Mark Price and Ron Harper. However, Curry was looking much more natural in year 2, as while he would only get about 19 minutes per game, he was averaging double figures while chipping in over a steal a night. And in a brief 8-game stint in the starting lineup early in the year, his offensive production was even better, but he was thriving coming off the bench, giving the Cavs an offensive spark plug and a legit floor spacer. And with their offseason and some midseason changes, the Cavs were showing great improvement and would manage 42 wins in 88, which got them a first-round matchup with Chicago. But once again, it was a brief series for Curry, as after 11 minutes in a Game 1 loss, he would only again see the floor briefly in Game 3, as the Cavs fell in 5, and Curry's year had ended with him averaging about 10 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But 2 new teams were set to join the league the following season, and the Cavs left Curry unprotected.
With its first pick in the expansion draft, Charlotte selected Dell Curry from the Cleveland Cavaliers.
So with their first pick of the 88 expansion draft, the Charlotte Hornets took Dell Curry. And even though he was clearly coveted, this was also his 3rd team in 3 years. But it would turn out pretty well for the sharpshooter. So on top of Curry, the Hornets had also drafted Muggsy Bogues and would make a trade to acquire Curry's former teammate, Kelly Tripucka. And a few days later, they'd select Rex Chapman in the rookie draft, as Curry was again coming off the bench. But he wouldn't have the season he was hoping for. His numbers were actually quite impressive. He was getting less minutes than last year, yet scoring more, and would do so on a career-high 49.1% shooting. But this season was disappointing for Curry for a couple reasons. For one, he missed the first 19 games of the year with a broken wrist. But when he came back, he was in head coach Dick Harder's doghouse, getting very limited minutes and even being benched for full games on multiple occasions. As reportedly, Harder was not a fan of Curry's seemingly uninspired play, suggesting Curry was pushing Harder to bench him due to his lack of enthusiasm. But the humble Curry took all the blame for his lesser role, later saying that he was out of shape and couldn't make his usual cuts. And while Curry would become a Hornets legend, he was almost gone at the deadline, as he was set to go to the Pacers before salary cap issues caused the trade to fall through. So overall, Curry would only appear in 48 games this season And while the Hornets only won 20 games, they were still popular, as they led the league in attendance. And Curry's first year in Charlotte wrapped up with him averaging about 12 points, 2 rebounds, and an assist per game. But Curry looked rejuvenated come the following season. Charlotte came back with a less crowded backcourt in 1990, and while Curry remained a bench player, he was now getting nearly 28 minutes a night as their sixth man. The Hornets had added some inside scoring through an early season trade which saw them acquire Armin Gilliam, but a lot of their scoring came from Curry, as with him finally getting some real minutes, he was scoring like he never had before, while also getting more opportunities to display his underrated passing ability, and even showing improved effort on defense with a career-high 1.5 steals per game, which led to him signing a 4-year extension during the season. And while Curry did miss 15 games due to injury, he would still hit double figures in 59 of his 67 games, which included a 30-point game in a January 15th loss to Phoenix. But this was still a second-year expansion team, and after an 8-32 start, Harder was let go and replaced with Gene Littles. However, they wouldn't fare much better with Littles, winning 11 more games to finish the year at 19-63. But Curry seemed to find his groove, as he had averaged about 16 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Curry would receive 8 less minutes per game in 91, but this was a direct result of the Hornets drafting Kendall Gill 5th overall, as Curry would see his numbers drop, yet was still giving the Hornets double-figure scoring on very efficient shooting splits. But the Hornets also traded away Armin Gilliam during the season, and with inside scoring already being one of their greatest weaknesses throughout their existence, this move didn't really make them better. But that didn't mean that they still weren't showing some improvement in year 3, as a full season of Littles at the helm would lead to the Hornets' best record in franchise history at the time, at 26-56. However, this still wasn't going to get them a playoff berth, as Curry wrapped up the year with averages of about 10.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But the Hornets would address their lack of an inside presence during the 91 draft. After landing the first overall pick, Charlotte selected UNLV's Larry Johnson, and Alan Bristow would take over as head coach. And under Bristow, the Hornets really started pushing the pace. And these changes were nothing but positive for Curry, as he was more than capable of running the floor in transition and either finishing at the rim or leaking out to the three-point line, as he shot the most threes of his career up to that point, and had his first season shooting above 40% from deep, leading to a spot in the three-point shootout. And with a big body like Johnson setting screens, or just commanding some attention down low, it left Curry with a lot of open looks in the half court as well. And with the Hornets trading away Rex Chapman this season, Curry's minutes would return to over 26 per night, as he would be the team's third leading scorer, with the Hornets being one of the league's highest scoring teams. And while their lack of defense would cost them a lot of games, they continued to improve, finishing at 31-51, as they were clearly heading in the right direction, with Curry's year seeing him average about 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Then in the 92 draft, the Hornets did more to address their defense. So now Charlotte had their front court of the future, with Johnson and second overall pick Alonzo Mourning. And with 2 legit scoring threats down low, Curry continued as one of Charlotte's greatest weapons, truly becoming one of the league's biggest deep threats, as he averaged over 3 three-point attempts per game, and continued to hit them at a 40% clip. And with Curry spending a little more time at small forward, he put up the best rebounding numbers of his career. And the addition of Mourning helped mask Curry's weaknesses on defense, as while Curry was never going to lock his man up, he did have a knack for jumping passing lanes. And now with Mourning there to bail him out if his gambles didn't pay off, Curry could play the lanes a lot more aggressively. And finally, Curry was getting recognition as one of the league's top 6 men, finishing 4th in 6th Man of the Year voting. And while part of this extra attention came from the Hornets being one of the league's most popular teams, it also came from them winning, as they were finally competing, hovering around 500 all season and securing their first winning record in franchise history, after ending the regular season with 5 straight wins. And their 44-38 record got Charlotte their first ever playoff berth to take on the Boston Celtics. However, Curry's first true playoff opportunity didn't start well, as he went 3 of 12 from the field in a Game 1 loss, and after 2 games, he was averaging less than 8 points. But in Game 3, he exploded for 14 points in the second quarter, and overall finished with 27 points and 3 steals on over 70% shooting, as the Hornets went up 2-1. And even after a poor Game 4 performance, all was forgiven after Alonzo Mourning hit the series winner, as Charlotte was on to the next round to take on New York. Unfortunately, Curry continued to struggle, averaging 8 points on only about 33% shooting over his first 4 games. And this wouldn't cut it against the Knicks, as Charlotte fell behind 3-1. Then although Curry had his best game of the series in Game 5, with 18 points on 7 of 12 shooting, the Knicks outlasted the Hornets to end Charlotte's season, as Curry's year ended with him averaging about 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But the 1994 season would see Curry add some hardware to his trophy case. After making the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, the Charlotte Hornets looked primed for an even better year in '94. However, they also looked a little different, as they had swapped Gill for Hersey Hawkins during the offseason. But the bigger obstacles to overcome were injuries to both Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson, as they missed a combined 53 games. But Dell Curry would do his best to make up for the lost production. Curry would play in all 82 games for the first time in his career, coming off the bench for every one of them, yet would still finish third to Mourning and Johnson in scoring on a career-high average, with a lot of those points coming from deep, as he shot over 40% from beyond the arc, and finished third in the NBA in three-pointers made, which got him a spot in the three-point shootout, with a couple of future NBA players sitting courtside to watch him. But the bigger honor came at the end of the season, when the man who had quietly been one of the league's best sixth men since he arrived in Charlotte was recognized as the 1994 Sixth Man of the Year. However, on top of the injuries to their big men, there was also some behind-the-scenes conflict between the two, after Johnson had signed a record-breaking contract going into the season. So with team chemistry also being affected, the Hornets weren't able to improve on last season, as they finished at 41-41, which wasn't enough for a return to the playoffs, as Curry's year ended with him averaging about 16.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Things went a lot better for the Hornets in '95, mainly because Mourning and Johnson both played healthy seasons, and this allowed the Hornets to take a different approach, as the traditionally fast-paced Charlotte basketball was gone, with the Hornets really slowing it down this season, and instead emphasizing defense, as they were one of the stingiest defenses in the league. And with their stars back, it would obviously take some shots away from Curry, and while he did see a drop in his scoring, it was just a result of the game plan. Yet one thing Curry didn't see a drop in was his three-point shooting, as with the league implementing a shortened three-point line for the first of 3 straight seasons, Curry hit 2 more threes than last year, and did so while playing 13 less games, as he shot nearly 43% from deep, and would end up finishing second to Anthony Mason in Sixth Man of the Year voting. And as a team, the Hornets looked like they were clicking, as they would really hit their stride in January and never really looked back, en route to the first 50-win season in franchise history, which got them a return to the playoffs to take on the Chicago Bulls. This would be a better playoff series for Curry, as he would hit double figures in every game while draining at least 2 threes per game. And after 2 games, the series was tied, with the Hornets pulling off a convincing win in Game 2, but Chicago blew them out in Game 3, then closed out the series 2 nights later with a close victory, as the Hornets season had come to an end, and Curry had averaged about 13.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But the first domino would fall going into the following season. As the '96 season began, a blockbuster trade saw a disgruntled Mourning sent to Miami, with Charlotte receiving Glenn Rice in return. And while they still had Johnson, they had lost their defensive anchor, and it showed, as the Hornets dropped to one of the league's worst defenses in '96. But they definitely had offense with the addition of Rice, and tried to bolster it even more with a mid-season trade to acquire point guard Kenny Anderson. And while the starting lineup had seen a lot of change, they could still count on Curry off the bench, for the most part, as this season would see him start a career-high 29 games, and put up some really good numbers in those games, as Curry was one of the main beneficiaries of a Hornets game plan that saw them act as one of the highest volume three-point shooting teams in the league, as Curry would put up career highs in both three-point attempts and makes, and would even drain a career-high 7 three-pointers in a December 14th loss to Portland. However, while the Hornets were still competitive, they were also a very different team from just a year earlier. And with that came growing pains, as they regressed from last year, finishing with a 41-41 record, which wasn't enough for a return to the playoffs. As Curry's year wrapped up, with him averaging about 14.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But by 97, it was a completely different Charlotte Hornets team. The offseason had seen the Hornets trade an unhappy Larry Johnson to the Knicks and receive Anthony Mason in return, and a draft day trade would see them acquire center Vlade Divac for their 13th overall pick in the 96 draft. And with Kenny Anderson leaving for Portland, it was a new-look team, who also had a new coach in Dave Cowens. But with adding guys like Divac and Mason, the Hornets now had capable passers all over the floor. And with knockdown shooters like Curry and Glenn Rice, the offense was a well-oiled machine. And Dell Curry wasted no time in the new offense, as on opening night he went for a career-high 38 points in a win over the Raptors, shooting over 65% and draining 6 three-pointers, as Curry would spend quite a bit of time in the starting lineup early in the year. But overall, even in year 11, Dell Curry remained one of the league's top 6 men and shot over 42% from deep. And while the Hornets took a little bit of time to find their groove, things were clicking as the year went on, as they strung together a 9-game win streak late in the season to finish with a franchise record 54 wins and get a date with New York in round 1. But this would be a series to forget for Curry, as he was limited by a calf injury and shot just 1 of 10 from the field over his first 2 games. Then although he had a solid performance in a starting role in Game 3, the Knicks would get the win to complete the sweep, as Curry's year had ended with him averaging about 15 points, 3 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. 1998 saw Curry become the longest tenured Hornet in franchise history after Bogues was traded early in the year. But 98 would also be the first sign of decline for Dell Curry, but it was more because of injury. He was doing his usual work over the first couple months of the year, but in late December, he re-aggravated his calf injury, and by late January, he was forced out of the lineup due to the strained calf. But it kept him out for a while, as he didn't make his return until mid-March, and was playing limited minutes over the remainder of the season. However, the Hornets still managed 51 wins, and returned to the playoffs to take on Atlanta. Curry would play solid this series, as he shot 48% from the field, but he just wasn't taking a lot of shots, averaging below 7 points over the first 4 games. But the Hornets closed it out in Game 4, to advance to a second-round matchup with Chicago. Curry would see a minutes decrease in this series after struggling in a Game 1 loss. However, he did redeem himself in Game 2 with a huge fourth quarter that saw him score 13 points on 5 of 5 shooting to help the Hornets come back and even the series. But that was his peak, as he scored 7 combined points over the remainder of the series, and the Bulls wrapped it up in 5, with Curry's season ending with him averaging about 9.5 points, 2 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But the final domino of the original Hornets fell over the offseason. The Hornets opted not to bring back Curry, as the first player chosen by the Hornets was leaving the team a decade later, having played the most games and hitting the most threes in franchise history. So he had established himself as a premier three-point shooter, and the Milwaukee Bucks had been one of the league's worst three-point shooting teams in '98. So they would sign Curry to address that need, as Curry joined a Bucks team led by a couple other good shooters in Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson. And with Curry playing 42 of a possible 50 games in the lockout-shortened season, he showed that he was just as lethal as he had ever been from beyond the arc, finishing second to Ray Allen in attempted and made threes. But he finished first on the team in three-point percentage, as his career-high 47.6% from beyond the arc would lead the NBA, and would also set a Bucks single-season record, which as of January 2025 still stands. And the Bucks would turn in their first winning record in nearly 10 years at 28-22, which was enough for a playoff berth and a matchup with Indiana. Unfortunately, Curry's three-point magic ran out in the playoffs, as he went a combined 1 of 8 from beyond the arc, and the Pacers swept the Bucks, with Curry's year seeing him average about 10 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. The Bucks opted not to re-sign Curry going into the following season, so he would instead sign with the Toronto Raptors team, who were surrounding young stars Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady with veterans, which included Curry's longtime teammate in Charlotte. And a shooter like Curry was a perfect player to help open up the floor. But in year 14, Curry was no longer the first man off the bench. However, he would still occupy an important role in the rotation, yet he was starting to slow down. And for the first time in 8 years, he shot below 40% from beyond the arc and had his lowest scoring average since his rookie year. But the Raptors looked like an up-and-coming team, as they won a then-franchise record 45 games and made their first playoff appearance, drawing the Knicks in round 1. However, Curry's role in this series was limited, averaging less than 10 minutes and taking just 4 shots, as the more experienced Knicks took this series in a sweep, with Curry's first year in Toronto seeing him average about 7.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. It was much of the same for Curry in 01. His minutes had decreased again, but this would allow him to play his most games in 6 years. And he would put up the second highest three-point percentage of his career. And a Raptors team which no longer featured McGrady also featured one of the league's best offenses under new head coach Lenny Wilkens, as they would top last season's win total by 2 and get a rematch with New York in the playoffs. Curry again didn't see the floor too often in this series, but the Raptors performed much better. And after falling behind 2-1, they wrapped it up in 5 to advance to a second-round matchup with Philly. And while this series is known for the duel between Vince Carter and Allen Iverson, Curry had some good moments, like a 20-point Game 1 to help Toronto steal a win in Philly, as he would hit double figures in 3 games. But eventually the series went 7, and Curry came up huge down the stretch, hitting a clutch three-pointer in the final minute to bring the Raptors to within 1. But that's as close as they would get, as Carter couldn't convert the game winner on the inbounds pass from Curry, as Curry's season ended with him averaging about 6 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist per game. The 02 season would be a step back, as a lot of Raptors dealt with injury, and their offense took a major hit because of it. But they would still stay afloat throughout the season, and again finish with a winning record at 42-40, which got them a first-round matchup with Detroit. And after 4 games, the series was tied, with Curry appearing in 3 of those games, yet being pretty quiet. Then in the series-deciding Game 5, Curry exploded for 17 points on 6 of 10 shooting, while hitting all 3 of his shots from beyond the arc. But it was deja vu, as Curry would hit another clutch 3 in the final seconds, but the Raptors would again come up short, with Curry's year ending with him averaging about 6.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. And Dell Curry's 16-year career would end on a bit of a high note, as that Game 5 in Detroit marked the end of his playing days, as his post-playing career would see him return to the Charlotte Hornets in a commentator role. And obviously, he would also get to watch both of his sons play in the NBA, with Seth putting together his own respectable career, and Steph putting together a Hall of Fame career, as one of the greatest of all time. And with both of them known as great shooters, it's clear that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Dell Curry should always be recognized as a great shooter, and likely always will. But with Steph Curry completely changing the game, Dell gets less recognition. And while shooting was his forte, he was much more than just a catch-and-shoot guy, and you can see his influence in his son's game. But take out the title of Steph's dad, and Dell Curry was one of the greatest shooters the league had ever seen at the time of his retirement, while also routinely being one of its top 6 men, year in and year out. And when you're talking about the greatest Charlotte Hornets of all time, Dell Curry is near the top of that list, as through the highs and the lows, Dell Curry was there, giving his all to the Charlotte faithful on and off the court, and was the first great shooter of the Curry family. But that's it for today's episode on Dell Curry. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on his longtime Hornets teammate, or this one on one of his early career Cavs teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.